Okay, over to you, Francis.
Hello, friends. Welcome to this 82nd webinar on the Secret Doctrine. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheading Moria Federation Webinars, then the webinar series in progress. All episodes of this, the Secret Teachings of All Ages, and the Treatise on Cosmic Fire series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald and the webinar series you'd like to view. You can also access any of these webinars on the homepage of moriafederation.com. Okay, this month in Old Diary Leaves, we're now in the 4th volume. We'll continue with Colonel Olcott's description from last month of the work of an extraordinary astrologer from Meerut, India, a city north of Delhi, who used a system called Nadi astrology. The ancient texts used in this system, called Nadi Granthams, were made of ancient palm leaves, for the most part, which contain the life stories and destinies of specific individuals, as foreseen by Hindu sages thousands of years ago. Sages, known as Nadi readers, interpret the information inscribed on these leaves to provide insights into a person's past, present, and future. In the 1880s, it was believed that these palm leaves held info on each and every Indian person, but not anyone born in other nations. So could we get a reader for the first part of this?
I'll start. If the reader will refer to the Theosophist for December 1887 and the article on Brigu Sanhita, he will see a very instructive narrative of Babu Keter Nath Chatterjee's experience with the Meerut astrologer above mentioned. It is worthwhile giving place to some extracts. From a relative of his, the author had learned of his having got from the Meerut astrologer a copy of his horoscope, taken from the ancient work in question, in which were given so many minute details of his past life as to amaze them both. Babu Keter Nath accordingly determined to see whether he would have a like good fortune, and with this object went to Meerut and hunted up the astrologer. On his way, he collected from 17 friends their Janma Lugnas and Rasi Chakras, together with a brief account of their lives written in English, of which the astrologer is ignorant, on separate pieces of paper.
Thank you, BL. Next up.
Vivian, can you read that, please?
The Janma Lugnas and Rasi Chakras were, however, written in characters which he could read, but which would give him no clue to the identity of the parties concerned. Since they were but the statements of the stars and constellations under which certain individuals were born, and would only serve to guide him as to the book in which to hunt up the horoscopes under corresponding astronomical signs. With this preface, we will now allow Babu Kedar Nath to describe what happened to him after he had handed the Devanagari memoranda of his 17 friends to the astrologer, one by one, and been shown that each person's horoscope was actually recorded in the pages of his mysterious book.
Okay, next up.
Okay, let's see, who do I have here? Kirsten, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. I had, he says, lost my own horoscope, prepared by my parents at my birth, and consequently I did not know the date and time of my birth. One morning I simply asked him, the Meerut astrologer, who am I? He ascertained the correct time of the day with the help of my watch, drew a Rasi chakra appertaining to the time of my query, and according to certain rules of astrology, drew a Rasi chakra of the time of my birth. Then, without reference to the Samhita core source, he told me from his personal knowledge of the signs some of the incidents of my past life. Some of his conjectures turned out to be correct, others were wrong. He then retired to his library, and after about 15 or 20 minutes, he brought out a book, and I myself found my horoscope in it after a search of about 10 minutes.
Thank you. Next, and finally.
Magda, can you read that for us, please?
I allowed the Pandit to read the whole of it, and I took him about 3 hours to finish it. I cannot now describe my feeling at that time. I thought indeed that I was in a state of dream. The horoscope proceeded, reminding me of the past events of my life from year to year. Some of them I had nearly forgotten, and I sometimes had to task my memory to recall them to mind. I cannot imagine a greater wonder than going to a stranger who, when you ask him who you are, gives you a book which contains minute details of your life from your birth to death. I assert that there is nothing in my horoscope which is not an actual fact, or which has not happened with reference to that portion of the horoscope which deals with my past life.
Thank you, Magda. Okay. We began our last session by comparing and contrasting archaic and modern scientific views, especially in terms of survival of the fittest, as that law applies to the birth of physical planets, which form through a gradual aggregation of substance. We learned that the strength and fortitude needed to survive physical plane existence only applies to the lower quaternary, whereas the term fittest, when applied to the quote worlds above, represents the ability of the higher form world to continually reject matter of an inferior quality and take on new matter that optimizes the expression of the indweller's consciousness. So the point here is that our usual understanding of survival of the fittest is that the weak are destroyed and those who are stronger survive. But what he's telling us here that everything survives on the higher levels, and the forms that have been outgrown are simply discarded and new forms taken on in order to continue one's path forward. And this would apply to every form of life. We then looked at the esoteric counterpart of this birthing process as described in the stanzas of Zahn from A Treatise on Cosmic Fire. Next, we compared first generation theosophy's teachings on primordial comets with teachings from A Treatise on Cosmic Fire on lesser and greater wheels. Both systems, both comets and these wheels, referring to the initial stages of planetary formation. We then learned that, quote, the abodes of Fohat are many, and that he places his four fiery, electropositive suns in the four circles. Their circles are the equator, the ecliptic, and the two parallels of declination, or the tropics, to preside over the climates of which are placed the four mystical entities. These four mystical entities having to do with manifestations of Fohat. Next, we learned about the locus, which represent 14 planes of consciousness from Patala Loka, the lowest demon-inhabited loka, to Satya Loka, wherein one passes beyond the need to incarnate. These 14 lokas are also associated with 7 latitudinal bands between the equators in both the north and south poles. We then looked at an old commentary that describes the songs of Fohat. These songs sound forth on the Atmic plane, whereon intelligent electricity manifests as sound. Fohat is song-like because sound on the Atmic plane manifests as beatitude, also known as the music of the spheres, which DK describes in TCF as, quote, sound realized as the raison d'être, or the source of being. Fohat's sons were radiant as the noontide sun, quote unquote, because Fohat is primordial light, that is to say, the source of light of the third aspect, whose dual nature is represented by the sun and the moon, solar and lunar consciousness. Finally, HPB attributes the existence of the northern and southern lights to polar Fohatic activity. And this takes us up to where we left off. So before we continue with the text, let's take a look at 2 passages from a treatise on cosmic fire that describe the nature of Fohat. Could we get a reader, please?
Yes. Tom, can you read that for us, please? Tom, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. Akasha in manifestation expresses itself as Fohat or divine energy, and Fohat on the different planes is known as ether, air, fire, water, electricity, ether, prana, and similar terms. It is the sum total of that which is active, animated, or vitalized, and of all that concerns itself with the adaptation of the form to the needs of the inner flame of life.
Thanks, Tom. And next, a reader, please.
Scott,
It's
can you
very
read that?
instructive, by the way. Go ahead, I'm sorry. Choose a reader.
Scott, please.
Yeah, I'll just say before Scott starts that when you're puzzling about what Fohat actually is, you know, we hear it called intelligent electricity, which is a difficult concept to understand. This particular passage from a treatise on cosmic fire, it's actually a whole section, but I've taken a few excerpts, is one of the best explanations of the nature of Fohat. Okay, go ahead, Scott.
Electricity on the first plane, the logoic or divine, demonstrates as the will to be, the primary aspect of that force which eventually results in objectivity. Electricity as vibratory impulse. Electricity on the monadic plane demonstrates as the first manifestation of form, as that which causes forms to cohere. Electricity as light. On this third plane, that intelligent principle demonstrates as coherent activity, either systemic, planetary, or monadic, and also as the triple vibration of spirit, matter, intelligence, sounding as the threefold sacred word or electricity manifesting as sound. On the fourth plane, this electrical force shows itself as color. It might here be asked why color primarily is spoken of as the Buddhic manifestation of electricity. We are employing the word color here in its original and basic sense as that which veils. Color veils the sevenfold differentiation of logoic manifestation.
Thank you, Scott. So this is my go-to quote for my own understanding of Fohad, because first of all, importantly, Fohad changes its nature. You know, it's called Fohad, the seven sons of Fohad, or the seven brothers Fohad. In the latter, it's talking about how Fohad manifests on each of the seven subplanes of the cosmic physical plane. And DK actually tells us here. So, you know, fundamentally, on the highest plane, on the first plane, it, you could say, is the means by which the will to be of the logos is able to function, right? It's the primary aspect of that force, which eventually results in objectivity, right? This is, he calls it here, vibratory impulse. This is not yet demonstrating, right? This is the subjective counterpart to that demonstration. And then on the next plane, it actually comes into being as that which causes forms to cohere. And its outer manifestation is as light, just as the third plane's outer manifestation is sound, and the fourth subplane, or the Buddhic plane's outer manifestation, is color. So I find this quite useful as a way of understanding the nature of Fohad. And it's especially important to realize that the color being talked about is, you know, not the rainbow colors, but rather this very first nature of what he calls here that which veils, right? The original and basic sense of that which veils. Well, that's what forms do, right? So this really is form creation on a noumenal level. Okay, I saw a hand. Couple of hands.
Yes, you've got two hands.
Good.
Go ahead, please, Nadell.
When you say the seven brothers of Fohad, would that be like the seven aspects of Fohad itself?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You could, and sometimes it's called, you know, the parent and its seven sons, and what that does is distinguish Fohad in abstraction. That's very similar to this idea of electricity as vibratory impulse, but as yet unmanifest. And then you have, in this case, you would then have six sons, right? But yes, you could call them aspects of Fohad. I see it as it's very much connected with the nature of the planes involved, right? So, for instance, the Atmic plane is very much concerned with what he calls here this triple vibration of spirit, matter, intelligence. It is you could say, the manifestation of the will to be, where, as opposed to the first plane, you have that pure vibratory impulse. But on the third plane, it actually manifests, and that is done through sound, right? Sound is the creative agent in our solar system. So very much Fohad is a function of creation. Of course, it brings into into activity the entire Davic kingdom and the elemental kingdoms through this quote unquote threefold sacred word. And did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else? I saw a hand.
Two more hands. Go ahead, Scott, please.
Okay. What this brings to mind here for me, this listing of electricity on first, second, third, and fourth plane, is that not coincidentally at all, matches up with the first 4 signs of the zodiac. You have Aries, Gemini, and Cancer.
Oh, I like that. Let me think about that. So then we would have, would you put, yeah, of course, Aries would be on this first plane, the impulse, the vibratory impulse, very Aryan. This is true.
Second, you associate with Taurus and light, the eye of the
Right, sure.
Heron.
Yeah. And, you can reverse engineer this and look and let this a section on Fohat actually inform one's understanding of the signs as well.
Yes.
Because, yeah, I like that. And then the third, we're in Gemini, coherent activity.
And sound.
And tell me how sound is associated with Gemini.
Because it deals with communication, Gemini does, and
Right.
patient. It's that which binds the others together.
Indeed. Yes. Right. So this articulated duality of Gemini is informed through sound and through the sacred word. I like that. And then finally, form, the form aspect through Cancer, the coloration. Yeah. Terrific observation. Thanks, Scott. I appreciate that. I had never made that association. Anyone else?
Well, Barbara had her hand up and she took it back. Barbara, did you want to say something?
Yes, I have a question about electricity is that which causes forms to cohere. Electricity is light. So I wonder if there's some sort of attractive force, if there's something that might be slightly love-like that would come in with light that would cause an attraction.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, the nature of Fohat, its fundamental property is that it binds spirit to form, right? It's where the indweller, the spark from the flame is separated and informed, quote, in dash formed through the agency of Fohat. And yes, very much it uses this quality of cohesion and of attraction, coherent activity, meaning to cohere. Yeah. So it's very much that agency. And if you look at all 4 of these levels, you see that quality, the law of attraction, the law of coherence, are present, at every level. Anyone else? Yeah, or do you have more? Go ahead.
I just wonder if that could be considered in some ways like love.
Well, absolutely. It's love is harmonious alignment and the knowing of the other. That is the ability to perceive, recognize, embrace, and know the other, right? So you can see that all of those qualities are present in the binding of spirit to form.
Great, thank you so much.
Also, Fohat releases, this is what this list tends to make one think involutionally, right? But Fohat also releases spirit from form as well. So it's not just what you might call an imprisoning agency, but it also provides the key to release. You could say in a sense that the Kundalini, which is electrical in nature, is a form of Fohat manifesting on the evolutional path.
Barbara, can you read that for us, please?
Perhaps the above will be regarded as archaic nonsense, but it will be better comprehended if the reader remembers the aurora borealis and Australia, both of which take place at the very centers of terrestrial electric and magnetic forces. The two poles are said to be the storehouses, the receptacles and liberators at the same time of cosmic and terrestrial vitality, in quotes, electricity, in quotes, from the surplus of which the earth, had it not been for these two natural safety valves, would have been rent to pieces long ago. At the same time, it is now a theory that has lately become an axiom that the phenomenon of polar lights is accompanied by and productive of strong sounds like whistling, hissing, and cracking, quote, in quotes. But see Professor Trumholtz's works on the aurora borealis and his correspondence regarding this moot question.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, first, perhaps the above will be regarded as archaic nonsense, but it will be better comprehended if the reader remembers that the aurora borealis and australis, both of which take place at the very centers of terrestrial electric and magnetic forces. So what she's suggesting that will be considered archaic nonsense is this teaching on the auroras being demonstrations of Fouad. So we now know that the aurora australis and aurora borealis are caused by the interaction of solar wind with the Earth's magnetic field and atmosphere. But this doesn't in any way disprove that these phenomena are also Fouadic demonstrations of intelligent electricity. In fact, you can make the case that this interaction of solar wind with Earth's magnetic field and atmosphere is itself Fouadic in quality. Okay, next up. The two poles. Oh, by the way, I encourage you have been already and appreciate it. You can see how much more interesting these presentations are when you get involved. So if you have any thoughts, any questions, please speak up. Okay, so next up, the two poles are said to be the storehouses of the the receptacles and liberators at the same time of cosmic and terrestrial vitality, quote unquote, electricity, or in brackets, electricity, from the surplus of which the Earth, had it not been for these two natural safety valves, would have been rent to pieces long ago. So HPP is here referencing cosmic and terrestrial prana. EK gives us more on this concept. Can we get a reader, please? This is an illustration of, looks like, I'm not sure. One of the poles. Let's see, this is Australia, so it's the South Pole. Yeah.
Michelle, can you read that for us, please?
In the planet, there will be found a similar organ or receiver within its etheric body, the locality of which is not for exoteric publication and cannot therefore be revealed. It is connected with the location of the two poles, north and south, and is the center around which the globe rotates, and is the source of legend of a sacred fertile land within the sphere of polar influences. The mythic land of exceeding fertility, of abundant luxuriance, and a phenomenal growth, vegetable, animal, and human would naturally lie where prana is received. It is the esoteric Garden of Eden, the land of physical perfection. Surface radiation demonstrates after distribution as planetary prana.
Thank you. So this source of prana is there in spite of, or whether or not, I should say, that particular area is exceedingly fertile, abundant in luxuriance and phenomenal growth. But if, for those of you who were in the Secret Teachings of All Ages webinar last time, you'll remember that the discussion was about the reversal of the poles, that there were 3 reversals that took place, and that during that time, of course, the poles would have been in the position at the equator, and that would be a natural time for them to have developed in this way. And of course, the pranic fields would have stayed in that locale. Yeah. Okay. Next. At the same time, it is now a theory that has lately become an axiom that the phenomenon of polar lights is accompanied by and productive of strong sounds like whistling, hissing, and cracking. But see Professor Trumholtz's works on the aurora borealis and his correspondence regarding this moot question. Okay, so it is now a known fact that various crackling sounds do accompany the appearance of the northern and southern lights. Yeah, you can, I'll read this, it's so short. On space.com, it says, our research suggests that the source of the sounds that are associated with aurora borealis we see is likely caused by the same energetic particles from the sun that create the northern lights far away in the sky. These particles of the geomagnetic disturbance produced by them seem to create sound much closer to the ground. So this doesn't tell us much more than it's generally recognized even today that these sounds exist. Sophist Trumholtz, his work Under the Rays of the Aurora Borealis was published in 1885. But I leafed through it and used keywords to try to find a reference to the sounds, and I couldn't find it. That doesn't mean it's not there, but I couldn't find in either book any reference to the sound generated by the Aurora Borealis. But it's, we don't actually need this reference because it's now a recognized fact. And with that, we come to the end of HBB's commentary on verse 6. Before moving on to verse 7, let's take a look at MPH's commentary. For those of you who don't do STOA, that's Manly P. Hall's commentary on verse 6. The verse itself states, the older wheels rotated downward and upward. The mother's spawn filled the whole cosmos. There were battles fought between the creators and the destroyers, and battles fought for space, the seed appearing and reappearing continuously. So could we get a reader for this right column, please?
Marguerite, can you read that for us, please?
The older wheels referred to are the first 3 globes of our own Earth chain, upon which man passed through the mineral, plant, and animal stages of his growth. The mother spawn are the world germs. They battled in space for a right to exist. Many were destroyed, but finally the stronger gathered themselves into comets and became the wanderers. These comets later became suns and planets. In embryology, we can see one of the most remarkable examples of primitive life and its battles for existence. In this microscopic war, many lives are lost. Rather, it would be better to say many little creatures lose the opportunity to live in order that one may survive.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions about this commentary? Yeah, he gives us a summary of each of the verses and the of all the stanzas of the Secret Doctrine. Some of them are quite insightful. Okay, well, that takes us up to a new verse, verse 7. Which reads, "Make thy calculations, O Lanu, if thou wouldst learn the correct age of thy small wheel," in parentheses, chain. "Its 4th spoke is our Mother Earth. Reach the 4th fruit of the 4th path of knowledge that leads to nirvana, and thou shalt comprehend, for thou shalt see." Okay, so can we get a reader for this part? The grayed out part is the verse itself, and the commentary starts with A. And she divides this into 2 sections. The first part of the commentary is about the small wheel is our chain of spheres, and the 4th spoke is our Earth, et cetera, et cetera. Could we get a reader, please?
Yes. Nadel, can you read for us, please? But before you do, I want to say Anne Veronica says the seed appearing and reappearing reminds of the center, which is everywhere.
It is indeed. It's a vortex. It's a Laya center. In fact, it's a noumenal source of the outer manifestation. You know, very much like that highest plane of Fohat. You know, where the will to be actually initiates the form aspect. Okay, reader.
The small wheel is our chain of spheres, and the 4th spoke is our Earth, the 4th in the chain. It is one of those on which the hot positive breath of the sun has a direct effect. The 7 fundamental transformations of the globes or heavenly spheres, or rather of their constituent particles of matter, is described as follows. 1, the homogeneous. 2, the aeriform and radiant, gaseous. 3, curd-like, nebulous. 4, atomic, ethereal, beginning of motion, hence of differentiation. Germinal, fiery, differentiated but composed of the germs only of the elements in their earliest states, they have 7 states when completely developed on our Earth. 6, fourfold, vapory, the future Earth. And 7, cold and depending on the sun for life and light.
Thank you. Okay. First, the small wheels. The small wheel is our chain of spheres, and the 4th spoke is our Earth, the 4th in the chain. It's one of those in which the hot positive breath of the sun has a direct effect. Okay, here's our quote, unquote, chain of spheres, which is the small wheel, right? Meaning that the greater wheel would be the entire Earth scheme. And so this is 1/7 or one chain of the entire Earth scheme. And then within that, we have these 7 globes that reappear 7 times. This illustration depicts the 4th of 7 Earth chains, each of which is made up of 7 globes, each globe manifesting 7 times by means of 7 rounds. So even though the chart shows 49 globes, it's actually the same 7 globes shown 7 times, once for each round. The 4th globe of each round is globe D, the Earth globe. It is the densest of the 7 globes, quote, on which the, quote, hot positive breath of the sun has a direct effect. Presumably because it is the densest and thus receives the physical effect of the sun, the actual heat aspect. Heat is often associated with density. Okay, next. The first part of the footnote, referenced by this direct effect, which reads, the 7 fundamental transformations of the globes or heavenly spheres, or rather of their constituent particles of matter, is described as follows. The statement references the 7-fold descent into matter that happens between globe A and globe D, not all through the 7 globes, because the last of these, the 7th, is actually densest matter. And it's very oriented towards, as is mentioned here, towards the, as she says, constituent particles of matter. So it references the material aspect of the 7 stages of descent. So first we have the homogeneous, which references the undifferentiated shining sea of substance, also called mula prakriti. And it just occurred to me that this actually may be starting on an inner round level, because if we go back up here, these you can see these titles, air, water, earth, that would put this first round at the level of fire, which is, I've seen that, just the first round is described as fiery. And so this 7-fold descent, we'll have to see if it lines up, but it may be that it actually starts on more numinal levels, meaning on the inner rounds. So I don't, for instance, see how any type of evolution or involution actually could take place at all in the sea, what's called the undifferentiated sea of shining substance, or mula prakriti. That's just the source of matter. But let's just see what we get here. So, second, the aeriform and radiant, gaseous. Okay, the first descent, wherein the element of air distinguishes the radiant but still undifferentiated form aspect. Third, curd-like, nebulous, the beginning of groupings of the as yet formless mass of substance. The term curds appears twice in the 3rd stanza. Quote, then the 3 fall into 4. The radiant essence becomes 7 inside, 7 outside. The luminous egg, which in itself is 3, curdles and spreads in milk-white curds throughout the depths of mother, the root that grows in the depths of the ocean of life. And in the 5th verse, the root remains, the light remains, the curds remain, and still Oyaohu is one. Okay. And we also have from the Puranas a similar description of the stage. Quote, the fountain of milk and curds was extracted from the sea of milk. So in this references 2 stages. And we would have here the aeriform stage before this curd-like stage might be being referenced here. Okay, fourth, atomic, ethereal, beginning of motion, hints of differentiation. The stage atoms of substance emerge. These are not the physical atoms of science, but rather those noumenal atoms which house the life of the indwelling jivas that Fohat binds together. With this emergence comes individual motion. Fifth, germinal, fiery, differentiated but composed of the germs only of the elements in their earliest states, they having 7 states when completely developed on our Earth. So at this stage, there's differentiation, but the elements haven't yet combined into complex molecular forms. With the phrase in the earliest state, they have 7 states, HPB indicates an additional 7-fold involutional stage by which the elements themselves develop. 6th, 4-fold vapory, the future Earth. Vapory suggests Earth's astral counterpart, or alternatively, the round 3 and globe 3 stages of development. And finally, 7, cold and depending on the sun for life and light, rather than generating heat and light from within itself. Let's take a look at an excerpt from the Secret Doctrine dialogues, which further references these 7 stages. Could we get a reader, please?
Joe, can you read that for us, please?
I will. Madame Blavatsky, the liar state corresponds to the atomic or ethereal, and the solar to germinal and the fiery. Mr. B. Kitely. That being so, what do the aeriform and the radiant or gaseous correspond to? Madame Blavatsky, the aeriform or gaseous transformation does not write a distinctive stage in the cosmic evolution, but rather a link connecting the homogeneous with the nebulae or curd-like stage, a correlation of one into the other. Mr. Mead, that is what you call matter in a critical state. Madame Blavatsky, yes, sir. 4-fold vapor represents the stages through which the Earth has passed to reach its present condition. The Earth is materialized vapor as ice is materialized steam. The 7th or depending stage describes the stage the Earth will reach at the end of the 7th round. Then men will depend on no other sustenance than their own divine natures. There will be no need of food or drink. They will have no more clubs or lawn tennis or anything. The principles of the earth will have almost entirely left her physical body, save the upper triad, just as this moon has done at the close of the lunar Mandantara, and its principles will be ready to shoot, each in its turn, onto a new Laya center to form a new globe, which will be the Earth's septenary only begotten son. Do you want to know anything more? You are the biggest pumpers I have seen in my life. My notes are at an end, and I open my brains to you, and you may ask what you like.
Thank you, Joe. She's great, isn't she? Yeah, any thoughts or questions about this? Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Having fun with my cursor. I hadn't intended, but I will say this, that it seemed to me that that 3rd stage was incredibly, when you're making the curds, is very important before the quaternary can come into awareness, a realization. And of course, the quaternary in this sense would be the stage of the human being.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to remember this is not so much about consciousness, this sevenfold formation. Uh, Not what she describes here so much, but what's described, in this seven here, right? This is much more about the form aspect, right? Of course, you can't, because the forms are inhabited at a certain stage, you can't completely divorce the two. But in this stage, well, my notes tell me this. The seven stages here listed, right here, seven stages here listed, describe a progressive densification, which reaches its culmination in globe D. But HPB here describes the seventh stage as being reached at the end of the seventh round, when in fact the matter of that round would clearly represent a return to the noumenal etheric levels of the first round, here called the homogeneous, right? So there's a little discrepancy in this. Of course, both are both systems are true. One describes progressive density, but it seems to me that finds its point of densest manifestation, what he calls here the cold and depending on the sun for life and light, at this stage of the fourth round, Globe D. Whereas what HPV describes here as the seventh or depending stage, which she links to the seventh round, is actually, wait a minute, yeah, is here at back to a very ethereal level of material substance. So little difference in that, but I think both systems are true. Okay. Good job. Yeah, here we go. Any thoughts or questions about this, about these stages? All right. Could we get a reader, please?
Who's good with math?
Yeah, who could read long digit? I'll give you a little clue. This is 311 trillion, 40 billion years. That's what he says here. And that's the only one you really have to know.
Okay, all right. To calculate its age, however, as the pupil is asked to do in this stanza, is rather difficult since we're not given the figures of the great kalpa and are not allowed to publish those of our small yugas except as to the approximate duration of these. The older wheels rotated for one eternity and one half of an eternity, it says. We know that by eternity, the seventh part of, what'd you say,
311
311
trillion.
trillion?
Yeah, 40 billion.
Okay, years or an age of Brahma is meant. But what of that? We also know that to begin with, if we take for our basis the above figures, we have the first of all to eliminate from the 100 years of Brahma, or 300 trillion, give or take. 2 years taken up by the Sandhyas, the twilights, which leaves 98, as we have to bring it to the mystical combination 14 by 7. But we have no knowledge of what time precisely the evolution and formation of our little Earth began.
Thanks, BL. Okay, first up, to calculate its age, however, as the pupil is asked to do in the stanza, it's talking about here, make thy calculations, O Lanu, right? Is rather difficult since we are not given the figures of the great Kalpa and are not allowed to publish those of our small yugas, except as to the approximate duration of these. This almost suggests that she was given these figures, but wasn't allowed to publish them, interestingly. Okay, so the its in calculates its age, right, refers, of course, to the earth. Quote, as the pupil is asked to do in the stanza, unquote, refers to the first line of the stanza here, which states, make thy calculations, O Lanu, if thou wouldst learn the correct age of thy small wheel, meaning the earth. On page 90 of this volume, HPB tells us that the figure associated with the great Kalpa is determined by pi. Can we get a reader for this? Yeah, someone that's not afraid of figures.
Scott, are you willing?
Sure.
Go for it.
Mathematically, they represent the well-known calculation, namely that the ratio of the diameter to the circumference of a circle is as 1 to 3.1415, or the value of the pi, as this ratio is called. The symbol pi being always used in mathematical formulae to express it. This set of figures must have the same meaning, since the 1 to 314,159, and there again, 1 to 3 to 145,15927 are worked out in the secret calculations to express the various cycles and ages of the firstborn, or the 311,440,000,000,000 with fractions, and yield the same 13,415 or 13415 by a process we are not concerned with at present.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So we'll just continue with this, and it's going to come together somewhat, at least, as we continue to explore it. Next, the older wheels rotated. Yeah, I'll just say the main thing here is to realize, and not get lost in these lesser figures, but to realize that this great Kalpa is, which itself is somewhat inexact terminology. It may refer to a Mahamanvantara. If so, then that would be the age of our solar system. But at any rate, the point here is that it's determined by pi through the use of the proportion represented by pi. Okay, so next up, the older wheels rotated for one eternity and 1/2 of an eternity, it says. We know that by eternity, the seventh part of 311,040,000,000,000 years, or an age of Brahma, is meant. So before we get into the specifics of this statement, let's take a look at an extended quote from a treatise on cosmic fire, which will help us to appreciate the complexity involved in determining these systemic cycles. By the way, this is the fifth ray part of the presentation. The listing shown here gives the Hindu system of cycles. Some of the terms used, such as Kalpa, Manvantara, and Yuga, are also used by DK. Others you never see in his writings, such as an Ahoratra, right? So could we get a reader, please?
Vivian, can you read that board, please?
One of the secrets of initiation is concerned with the apprehension of cycles and with their duration, and the following terms have to be appreciated, their duration recognized, and their antithesis, in brackets, an intervening pralaya, duly considered before a man is considered a true occultist. A. 100 years of Brahma, an occult century, the period of a solar system. B. 1 year of Brahma, the period of 7 chains where the 7 planetary schemes are concerned. C. 1 week of Brahma, the period of 7 rounds in one scheme. It has a chain significance. D. 1 day of Brahma, the occult period of a round. E, 1 hour of Brahma, concerns interchain affairs. F, 1 Brahmic minute, concerns the planetary centers and therefore egoic groups. G, 1 Brahmic moment, concerns an egoic group and its relation to the whole.
Okay, so you can see that this is a subjective use of these terms, years, weeks, days, and moments. I don't believe that they translate into any kind of precise precise period for a cycle. And that's based on trying to work with this, and we'll look at that a little bit as we go. Okay, next up, reader, please.
Magda, can you read that for us, please? Magda? Okay, let's go to Marguerite, please. Can you hear me? Oh,
Yes,
there we go. Okay.
From these are the greater periods?
Yeah.
These are the greater periods of time, and when their significance is comprehended, much that is now obscure will be revealed. As yet, it is only to initiates that the true figures are given. The figures in the secret doctrine, such as the 100 years of Brahma, strike the general average, but it must be ever remembered that in considering the figures where a scheme, for instance, is concerned, much latitude has to be allowed for individual planetary karma and idiosyncrasy. The following points are worthy of consideration when upon this subject and deal with some interesting factors. All the planetary rishis are not equally long-lived in the occult sense of the term, and the 7 planetary logoi of the 7 sacred planets are at different stages of evolution. Their vibratory response, therefore, differs, producing varying effects in time.
Thank you. Next.
Let me see, Michelle, can you read that for us, please?
The 3 major planetary schemes, Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn, have not as yet received their fullest stimulation and will not do so until the energy of the Sacred 7 has been transferred to them. Figures, therefore, as regards their duration and persistence, are not in order. The figures for the planets concerned with the inner round differ as to length of time, but not as to space location from those of other planets. The true figures in connection with any planetary scheme and its occult activity are not ascertainable by the man who cannot be trusted with the significance of the other planetary bodies of great number within the solar ring pass not. The entire solar sphere is full of such bodies, characterized by the same features as are the 7 and the 10, and each of them are in some degree as an effect upon the whole. Figures, therefore, cannot be considered as final until the effect of the lesser planetary bodies upon their immediate neighbors is known, and the extent of their planetary radiation has been gauged. There is more than 115 of such bodies to be reckoned with, and all are at varying stages of vibratory impulse.
Okay, this last statement is somewhat famous. It's often quoted that there's over 115 planets, planetesimals, bodies of some type in our solar system, right? Yeah. Okay, and finally, reader, please.
Barbara, can you read that for us, please? Oops, guess we lost her. Okay, Joe, please.
They have definite orbits. They turn upon their axis. They draw their life and substance from the sun. But owing to their relative insignificance, they have not yet been considered factors of moment. This attitude of mind will change when etheric vision is a fact, and the reality of the existence of an etheric double of all that is in manifestation will be recognized by scientists. This fact will be demonstrated towards the close of the century, and during the early part of the next century, a revolution in astronomical circles will occur, which will result in the study of the etheric planets. As these bodies are organs of energy permeating the dense form, the study of the interaction of solar energy and the occult give and take of planetary bodies will assume a new significance. Certain planetary bodies, both greater and lesser, are absorbers, others are radiators, while some are in the stage of demonstrating a dual activity and are being transmuted. All these circumstances require to be considered by the initiate who is dealing with cycles.
Thank you, Joe. So the point of this long reading is really all wrapped up in this last sentence, which is that there are so many factors involved in determining the nature of a cycle, and it's so much depends on the interdependence between all these aspects that he points out in these pages. Okay, back to the text, which states, the older wheels rotated for one eternity and 1/2 of an eternity, it says. Okay, we know that by eternity, the seventh part of 311 trillion, 40 billion years, or an age of Brahma is meant. So let's see if we can align DK's teachings with what HPB here presents. We'll only be partially successful at this, but we will make some headway. On page 36 of this volume, HPB says, the 7 eternities meant are the 7 periods, or a period answering in its duration to the 7 periods of a Manvantara and extending throughout a Mahakalpa, or the Great Age, 100 years of Brahm, making a total of 311 trillion 40 billions of years, each year of Brahm being composed of 360 quote-unquote days, and of the same number of nights of Brahma. Okay. When we go back to DK's listing, we see that 100 years of Brahma is the, quote, period of a solar system, which HPB tells us is 311 trillion 40 billion years. The length of an eternity, HPB here tells us, is 1/7 of 311 trillion 40 billion years, which is approximately 444 billion 343. I mean 440. Yeah, that's right. 444 billion 343 million years, making, quote, one eternity and 1/2 of an eternity, approximately 666 billion 514 million years. Interestingly, both 444 and 666 are numbers of manifestation, with 4 being the number of form and 666 representing the lowest 18 subplanes of the cosmic physical plane. So always you have to look to the numerological significance of these figures, not just the durational aspect of it. I see a hand.
Go ahead, please, Scott.
Yeah, don't we also associate these triple figures with the actual numbers of the planets, the names of the planets.
Outstanding. Yes, that's exactly right. We know, for instance, that our planetary logos, Sanakamara, associates with the number 777. And then he makes, this is like the very last page of the first section of Treatise on Cosmic Fire. And he then just makes, just tells us what you just said, that the other planetary logoi also relate through this triple number. So yes, indeed, we don't, however, have those numbers, for the other planets. That would be a great thing to know, but we don't have that info. You can speculate. You have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I think we did that once upon a time. Let me see.
I'm not surprised.
Way back when. And you said this was at the very end?
Yeah, I think it's the last page of the first division of the 3 divisions. I can't give you a page number. It's going to be 230-ish, maybe.
230-ish, okay.
You could pull somewhere around there. Or you could do a word search for 777. If you can
Yeah, I should probably have that. I have it in the back of my book. I included it. Let me see here. Oh yeah, okay. 7. We were relating them also to the tarot cards. Another thing we did with them.
Even less surprised by that.
444 we lined up with the Hanged Man, and 666 with the Moon, and so forth. But
right. Well, the Hangman is the number 12, which is an addition of force, and yeah, and 666 with the Moon, and that's absolutely fits. Philosophically, 18 is as the number of the Moon, and being the lower quaternary, the subplanes of the lower quaternary, right? It takes you up through the 4th subplane of the mental plane, but not the higher 3. So, but no reference. Yeah, are you on the quote?
pardon me?
Did you find that quote that I mentioned?
No, 306 maybe here. Let's see here. Just a second. That's about right, yeah. 777 incarnations.
Yeah, that's another aspect of the 7770, but that's not the reference to the identity of the planetary logos. Yeah, but they're tied, they're connected.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh well, if you, we'll leave it, and if you find it and it's appropriate, you can jump back in. Okay, thanks. Let's see, where am I? Okay, so we're talking about these figures, about 444 and 666 being the numbers of manifestation, representing the lowest 18 subplanes. This fits with the idea that the figure for 100 years of Brahma is determined by pi, which relates the length of the diameter, representing manifestation, and the circle, representing the noumenal unmanifest realms of spirit. But what are the quote-unquote older wheels, which last 1.5 eternities? A few pages back, HPB tells us, quote, the phrase older wheels refers to the worlds or globes of our chain as they were during the previous rounds. Actually, MPH says he thought it meant the 3 previous globes of this round, but we'll go with what HPB says here. Globes of our chain during the previous rounds. If this is what is being referred to in the statement, the older wheels rotated for 1 eternity and 1/2 of an eternity, we might hypothesize that it refers to the 7 globes of the previous chain demonstrating through the 7 rounds. One eternity and 1/2 of eternity may refer to a period of manifestation plus the pralaya that follows, though there's no way to verify this as far as I know. In fact, other sources describe a Palaya as being either the same length as the time of incarnation or even of much longer. And then still others, in fact, the quote from TCF just told us that in a sense, you're out of linear time altogether during a Pralaya, and you can't really calculate it as being a part of the progressive flow of linear time. So you can see how difficult this becomes. But beyond this, it is impossible to rectify the listing given us by DK with this statement by HPB. For example, DK tells us that, quote, 1 year of Brahma is a period of 7 chains, where the 7 planetary schemes are concerned, whereas HPB infers that a chain is 1 eternity, which is 1/7 of an age of Brahma, a much, much longer period, right? By the way, and this is as far as we'll take this, it seems to me that if a year of Brahma is the length of a scheme of 7 chains, and 100 years of Brahma is indeed the length of a solar system, then 100 years of Brahma must be the period of not just one of, but of all 7 incarnations of a solar system. Because, the 7 chains of a planetary logos take a significant part of the life of 1 incarnation of a solar logos. And so it just seems so unlikely that you would have it representing only 1/100th of the period of a solar logoic incarnation. But there are so many blinds in the figures given. Also, no time links are given for the pralayas between each globe, round chain, and solar incarnations, thus making it impossible to determine the real figures involved. I saw a hand.
Yeah, go ahead, please, Scott.
Yeah, you were right approximately on page 306. It talks about 777 incarnations and points out that this number primarily applies to the planetary logos of our scheme and not so much to the other schemes. Each heavenly man has his own number, and the number of our heavenly man lies hid in the above in 3 figures, just as 666 and 888 holds the mystery hid of 2 other heavenly men. This number 777 is also the number of transmutation, which is the fundamental work of all the heavenly men.
There you have it. Okay. Just curious, was that the last page of that first section?
Yes, it was. Introductory.
Yeah. Yeah, it really stuck with me when I read that.
We also were applying 666 to Venus.
There's a possibility, huh?
Possibility, yeah.
Yeah, well.
To figure out what 888 was, if not the sun, what would that be? I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
Played with once upon a time.
Yeah, good. Yeah, well, it's become transitionally useful here, so thanks. Okay, so anyway, you see the problem that in terms of rectifying HPB system, with DK's system. Personally, I'll go with DK's on this type of thing, mainly because so much more was allowed to be given out by the time DK wrote, right? So I would think that what's described in this important paragraph is more accurate in general. I'm sure the 311 trillion, 40 billion years has relevance, but like I said, there are so many blinds involved here. And, you have to ask, are the pralaic periods taken into account, et cetera. Next up, we also know that, to begin with, if we take for our basis the above figures, we have first of all to eliminate from the 100 years of Brahma, or 311 trillion 40 billion years, 2 years taken up by the Sandhyas, twilights, which leaves 98, as we have to bring it to the mystical combination 14 times 7. This is pure numerology, okay? It doesn't really have that much to do with accurately determining the length of these cycles, which, by the way, it's the secret of initiation anyway. So 14 by 7 suggests the days and nights of Brahma, the latter representing Pralaya with 7 times 7 periods for each, and with one Sandhya, or period, for the dawn interval, and one for the twilight. I think there's these figures are mostly driven by the significance of the numerology associated with them rather than the literal figures. That's just my take on it. Okay, next. But we have no knowledge at what time precisely the evolution and formation of our little Earth began. Thus, in spite of having some numerical data, it is impossible to know just where we are in the great cycle of unfoldment of our globe, let alone of our planetary scheme. It's kind of like an ant who can see an inch in front of him trying to calculate the circumference of the Earth. The human perspective is simply too limited to give us any real accuracy. Okay, next up, and some of you will be relieved to know that pretty much we're out of the number part. Okay, so can we get a reader, please?
Nadel, can you read that for us, please?
Therefore, it is impossible to calculate its age unless the time of its birth is given, which the teachers refuse to do so far. At the close of this book and in book 2, however, some chronological hints will be given. We must remember, moreover, that the law of analogy holds good for the worlds as it does for man, in that as the one deity becomes 2, deva or angel, and the 2 becomes 3, or man, etc., etc., so we are taught that the Kurds, world stuff, become wanderers, comets. These become stars, and the stars, the centers of the vortices, our sun and planets, to put it briefly. This cannot be so very unscientific, since Descartes thought also that the planets rotate on their axes because they were once lucid stars, the centers of vortices.
Thank you. So first, therefore, it is impossible to calculate its age unless the time of its birth is given, which the teachers refuse to do so far. At the close of this book and in book 2, however, some chronological hints will be given. So information like the precise time of the birth of our globe is invariably a secret of initiation. Any specific information like that is going to be a secret of initiation. Here's an example of one of the quote unquote chronological hints given in volume 2 of the Secret Doctrine. We're not going to go into this, but I just want to show you how deeply she explores this. Most of this is comes from the Hindu astrologers. Next, we must remember, moreover, that the law of analogy holds good for the worlds as it does for man, and that as, quote, the one deity becomes 2, deva or angel, and 2 becomes 3, or man. Okay, the absolute here represented by a circle, reflects itself into being as the first principle or deity, who in turn reflects itself into manifestation as a shining sea of undifferentiated, intelligent substance. It is this reflection that HPB is referring to when she says the one, deity, becomes the two, deva or angel. Through the agency of Fohat, their interaction of these two inner circles creates the sun or consciousness aspect, represented here by the mandorla or vesica piscis. It's for this reason that the Christ is depicted as emerging from the vesica piscis over the main entrance at Chartres Cathedral. This is the true man, the third to appear, or as HPB says, and two becomes three, or man. Next. So we are taught that the Kurds, world stuff, become wanderers, comets. These become stars, and the stars, the centers of vortexes, or suns and planets, to put it briefly. This statement applies to the idea of one becoming two, becoming three. It applies this idea to planetary formation. The Kurds are noumenal substance, which again, through the agency of Fohat, become comets. DK would say primordial wheels, issuing from the above-mentioned centers of vortices, which in both cases become the stars and planets. I read a news article this morning from the European Space Agency on super distant galaxies that lends at least some credence to HPB's comet formation theory. Quote, you can see, notice this is an image by the James Webb Telescope. You can see this activity below in a region of Digel Cloud 2S. Amidst this cluster of young stars are jets zipping out from the cluster. Young stars emit these jets of gas and dust from their poles, which travel into space. Now, we have to note that the stars themselves don't travel like comets do, but I can see how these jets might create the appearance of comets for one with inner vision, such as HPB had when she was writing this material. So there might be a relationship here. Who knows? And finally, we have the footnote, which would be the last thing we cover today, which states, this cannot be so very unscientific, since Descartes thought also that, quote, the planets rotate on their axes because they were once lucid stars, the centers of vortices. Here, HPB is associating the term stars with vortices or Lea centers. It is only, quote unquote, unscientific because science doesn't recognize these Lea centers. Okay, I think we'll stop here because next is a whole new reading. So let's stop at this point. Any final thoughts or questions on anything from today's material? All right then, dates. I think we're, yeah, go ahead, BL, if you have dates.
Okay, so next up is PCF, the 27th of September. Then the next STOA is 6 October. And the next Secret Doctrine will be the 20th of October.
20th, okay. Good. All right, well, thank you all very much for attending and for hanging in there through all that cycles and math stuff. I noticed we lost a couple, but you have to think more in terms of the numerological significance than any kind of literal figures for those periods. So, okay, we'll see you all next time, which will be 2 weeks from this last Friday for the next Jesus on Cosmic Fire. Thanks for attending. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Hi, everybody.